It happened without warning. No press briefing. No soft rollout. Just a sudden confirmation that sent shockwaves through royal circles and media newsrooms alike. Minutes ago, the palace released evidence it had guarded for years, documents that were never meant to surface. At the center of it all was a name that guarantees controversy. And once the seal was broken, it became clear this wasn't damage control. This was calculated exposure. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The confirmation arrived with a chilling precision that left no room for misunderstanding. It was brief, unmistakable, and devastatingly deliberate. Palace officials did not hedge. They did not soften language. They did not offer interpretation. They confirmed existence. That alone was enough to send shockwaves racing through institutions that had long operated on quiet understandings and unspoken agreements. Royal watchers who had spent years parsing tone and subtext were suddenly faced with something far more dangerous than rumor: acknowledgement. And acknowledgement changes everything. Within minutes, disbelief turned to urgency. Phones lit up. Messages circulated in hurried fragments. Media circles reacted not with curiosity, but with panic, because this was not a leak that could be dismissed or reframed. This was a release. The difference mattered. A leak invites debate. A release asserts authority. The palace had chosen to step out of its long-held posture of restraint and into something far more confrontational. That choice alone suggested preparation, patience, and intent built over time. The timing felt surgical, not reactive, not emotional, chosen. The palace did not act in the heat of controversy or under visible pressure. It acted when it believed the ground was stable enough to absorb the blast. That stability hinted at years of quiet observation, collection, and calculation. This was not a decision made overnight. It carried the unmistakable weight of a strategy that had been waiting for the right moment to be executed. Royal observers immediately sensed that this confirmation was only the opening move. The language used was careful but loaded, signaling depth without revealing scope. It suggested that what had been released was not the full story, but the undeniable proof that a story existed. That implication alone rattled assumptions. It also raised an unsettling question. If the palace was willing to break its silence now, what had pushed it past the point of no return? Early reactions hinted at something even more destabilizing. The framing implied coordination beyond a single individual. The suggestion that Meghan had not been acting alone introduced an entirely new layer of complexity. This was no longer about personal grievance or media tension. It was about systems, networks, and influence operating beneath public narratives. The idea that those systems might now be exposed was enough to trigger immediate defensive positioning across multiple fronts. What made this moment so explosive was not just the evidence itself, but the message embedded within its release. The palace was no longer absorbing pressure, it was redirecting it. Silence had ended. And when an institution built on restraint chooses exposure instead, it signals that what has been uncovered is too consequential to contain quietly. But to understand why the palace would detonate its own silence, we must look at what had been quietly building behind the scenes. For years, rumors circled quietly, too carefully worded to confront, too consistent to ignore. Sources hinted at coordination, timing, and unusually aligned media narratives. The palace denied nothing and confirmed nothing. Until now. Because what was released wasn't speculation, it was documentation. Emails. Agreements. Timelines. A paper trail that turned whispers into something far more dangerous. Structure. Those whispers had always shared a common rhythm. Stories broke at the same moment across outlets that rarely aligned. Headlines echoed one another with uncanny precision. Emotional framing appeared synchronized, as if guided by an invisible metronome. Inside palace walls, aides noted it without naming it, because naming it would require proof. And proof, in this arena, is everything. Without it, confrontation would have collapsed into chaos. So the palace watched. And waited. Patterns raised internal alarms long before they reached the public eye. Analysts flagged timing anomalies, exclusive pieces, landing just as negotiations stalled, sympathetic narratives cresting precisely when pressure peaked. It felt less like coincidence and more like choreography. Still, the institution held its silence. Public denial would have legitimized rumors. Private accusation would have invited legal disaster. The safest move was restraint, even as the drumbeat grew louder. Quietly, records began to accumulate. Nothing flashy. Nothing that could be traced back to intent, just preservation. Communications archived as a matter of routine. Calendars compared. Access logs cross-referenced. The work was methodical, almost boring by design, because boredom keeps secrets safe. Over time, fragments began to align. A meeting here, a promise there. Language repeated across platforms in ways that suggested planning rather than passion. The moment suspicion hardened into certainty did not arrive with shock. It arrived with clarity. A timeline snapped into focus and refused to blur again. When dates were stacked side by side, cause and effect emerged. When correspondence was layered over coverage, the curve smoothed into a line. What once looked like noise became signal. The palace did not rush. Rushing would have been reckless. Instead, it allowed the picture to complete itself. Silence during this period was not absence. It was armor. Each unanswered question bought time. Each refusal to engage denied oxygen to speculation while the evidence matured. Critics mistook the quiet for weakness. Insiders knew better. The palace was building a case that would not need explanation once revealed. When documentation replaces denial, debate narrows. And that narrowing was intentional. By the time the collection phase ended, the institution understood the stakes. This was no longer about perception management or media tension. It was about exposure of a system, how narratives could be guided, how access could become leverage, how timing could manufacture inevitability. The realization carried weight because it implicated not just individuals, but processes that had operated comfortably in plain sight. What made the situation ominous was not merely the existence of records, but their coherence. They told a single story from many angles, each reinforcing the next. That coherence transformed rumor into risk and patience into power. The palace had what it needed, and with that came a new question: how much to reveal and when. And once the palace connected the dots, attention shifted to how deep the arrangements truly went. The deal was never supposed to look like a deal. That was the genius of it. No public contracts, no obvious signatures, just influence exchanged for access, silence traded for narrative control, and timing that always seemed too perfect to be coincidence. According to the evidence released, this wasn't a single agreement, it was a system designed to operate in plain sight while remaining deniable. What emerged from the documents was not a tidy arrangement, but a layered architecture, built to flex and adapt without ever declaring itself. Access was the currency, but not the kind that could be easily traced. Invitations appeared informal. Conversations happened off record. Background context replaced attribution. The structure relied on proximity rather than paperwork, creating a flow of information that could be guided without ever being owned. It was influence without fingerprints, power without signatures. Media companies were not named as participants in a traditional sense, yet their presence was unmistakable. The evidence suggested indirect implication through patterns who received early briefings, who published first, who echoed the same framing across platforms within hours. These outlets benefited from exclusivity while maintaining plausible independence. In return, narratives settled into predictable arcs. Sympathy surged on cue. Criticism softened at strategic moments. The relationship thrived on mutual advantage, not obligation, which made it harder to challenge and easier to deny. Exclusive access became leverage because it didn't need to be negotiated publicly. The promise was implicit: stay aligned, stay close, step out of line, and the access evaporates. That dynamic blurred the line between storytelling and strategy. What appeared as organic coverage often carried the weight of expectation. Stories didn't just report events, they anticipated them, framed them, and sometimes seemed to usher them into existence. The system didn't silence dissent, it crowded it out. Clauses, where they existed, were not traditional legal safeguards, but behavioral ones. Language was carefully chosen to avoid direct accountability. Nothing demanded compliance. Everything encouraged alignment. The design favored suggestion over instruction, timing over commands. That subtlety was the shield. If challenged, participants could claim coincidence, editorial judgment, or public interest. The system anticipated scrutiny and built its escape routes in advance. Deniability was not a byproduct, it was the point. The architecture depended on the absence of a single document that could end the conversation. Instead, it offered many small pieces that only made sense when assembled together. That assembly was never meant to happen outside the palace. It assumed silence would hold, that the complexity would discourage confrontation, that the cost of exposure would outweigh the benefit. What elevated the stakes was the realization that this system did not require constant management. Once established, it sustained itself. Expectations formed. Patterns repeated. Participants learned the rhythm and adjusted without instruction. Influence became ambient, always present but rarely acknowledged. The machinery ran quietly, producing outcomes that felt inevitable rather than engineered. For palace officials, the revelation was not just that such a system existed, but that it functioned so effectively for so long. It explained the precision of coverage, the resilience of certain narratives, the way public sentiment could be nudged without visible force. The documents did not accuse, they illuminated. And illumination, in this case, was more destabilizing than any allegation. But what shocked palace officials most wasn't the existence of the deal, it was when it began. There was a moment when the tone shifted. Coverage hardened, narratives synchronized. Stories landed with uncanny precision. At the time, it felt organic, emotion-driven, even sympathetic. But in retrospect, palace analysts began to see it differently. What looked like chaos may have been choreography. And once that realization set in, every headline had to be re-examined. The shift didn't announce itself. It revealed itself through rhythm. Analysts traced the timeline backward, comparing dates, release hours, and emotional peaks. A pattern emerged where none had been obvious before. Coverage that once felt reactive now appeared anticipatory. Stories arrived fully formed, not evolving with events but framing them in advance. When one outlet softened its language, others followed within hours. When emphasis changed, it changed everywhere. The speed was the tell. Independent judgment does not move that fast in unison. Tone changed next. Early reporting carried complexity, hesitation, even contradiction. Then it flattened. Nuance gave way to certainty. Doubt dissolved into confidence. Emotional framing repeated with striking similarity, betrayal emphasized here, victimhood underscored there, redemption hinted at precisely when pressure mounted. The same words, the same arcs, the same pauses. Palace staff began cataloguing phrases that recurred across platforms as if pulled from a shared script. It was not proof on its own, it was proximity. Too close to ignore. Release windows tightened. Stories dropped in clusters, often late at night or early morning, maximizing impact while limiting immediate response. Follow-ups landed before counterpoints could form. The sequence mattered as much as the content. First the emotional hook, then the reinforcing analysis, then the chorus. Each wave arrived on schedule, leaving little room for deviation. What had once felt like momentum now felt managed. The emotional framing was the most persuasive element. It didn't argue facts, it guided feeling. Anger was cultivated, then soothed. Sympathy surged, then settled into acceptance. The narrative did not ask audiences to decide, it carried them along. Palace analysts recognized the technique from crisis management playbooks, not newsrooms. That recognition changed the stakes. This was no longer about unfavorable coverage. It was about influence. The realization landed heavily. If patterns were intentional, then public opinion could be shaped without overt direction. That possibility was chilling. Institutions rely on trust in organic discourse. Engineered sentiment threatens that trust at its core. The palace understood the danger not only to reputation, but to reality itself. Once belief is guided quietly, correcting it becomes nearly impossible without escalation. Fear followed clarity. Not panic, but resolve. The concern shifted from reputational harm to containment of a system that could repeat, adapt, and persist. If this choreography remained unchallenged, it would become precedent. The palace could endure criticism. It could not endure a permanent mechanism designed to steer perception beyond accountability. The re-examination widened. Past headlines were pulled, sequences reassembled, motives reconsidered. What once appeared spontaneous now looked strategic. The question was no longer whether coordination existed, but how far it reached and who benefited most. Each answer pointed to a deeper problem and a narrower window to act. As the palace watched the narrative evolve, concern turned into something far more serious: containment. The most dangerous question isn't what the palace knew, but why it waited. For years, officials absorbed criticism without response, allowing damaging narratives to spread unchecked. That silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. Because confronting media power without proof would have backfired catastrophically. The palace needed certainty. And once it had it, the rules changed. Early confrontation carried unacceptable risk. Accusations without documentation would have invited lawsuits, amplified suspicion, and handed control of the story to those best equipped to exploit it. Inside the institution, this was understood with brutal clarity. To speak too soon would have meant forfeiting credibility forever. So the palace chose endurance over retaliation, restraint over reaction. Each unchallenged headline was weighed against a single objective: gather evidence strong enough to stand when the noise finally peaked. Legal realities shaped every decision. Naming media entities without airtight documentation would have triggered a cascade of consequences the monarchy could not afford. Litigation thrives on ambiguity, and ambiguity was precisely what the palace refused to offer. Silence, in this context, became a shield. It preserved institutional legitimacy, while the groundwork was laid quietly, meticulously, and without spectacle. The public mistook restraint for surrender. Internally, it was understood as preparation. Credibility was the long game. By refusing to engage in a war of words, the palace protected its ability to speak once and be believed. Officials understood that credibility, once spent, cannot be reclaimed. Every denied rumor would have fed another. Every rebuttal would have demanded a counter. So the palace stepped back, allowing patterns to emerge fully. Let the cycle repeat. Let the rhythm settle. Let coincidence exhaust itself until only intention remained. That strategy was not without conflict. Internal disagreements flared over timing. Some argued that continued silence inflicted reputational damage that might never heal. Others insisted that premature exposure would poison any eventual revelation. These debates were intense and unresolved for years. The fault line ran between urgency and certainty, between emotional relief and strategic necessity. In the end, certainty won not because it was safer, but because it was decisive. Letting patterns fully form was a calculated gamble. It required patience that bordered on cruelty, especially for those absorbing the fallout in real time. But it also ensured that when the palace spoke, it would not be arguing. It would be presenting. Documentation would replace rhetoric. Timelines would replace denial. The narrative would no longer be something to contest, it would be something to confront. Preparing for a single decisive release meant discipline. No leaks, no hints, no trial balloons. The palace resisted every temptation to correct the record incrementally. Incrementalism would have diluted impact. Instead, officials planned for a moment that would collapse speculation into clarity. One release, one message, one shift in the balance of power between silence and exposure. When that moment arrived, it would not invite debate, it would redefine it. The palace would not ask for trust, it would demonstrate why trust had been withheld. And in doing so, it would transform years of restraint into a single act of assertion that could not be ignored. But silence has consequences, and not everyone inside the family agreed with the cost. While the public saw unity, the family felt strain. Trust eroded. Loyalties were questioned. Some believed exposure would only inflame the situation. Others argued silence was enabling it. Private conversations grew tense. Lines were drawn quietly. And for the first time, the conflict wasn't just external, it was tearing inward. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere changed in ways no public appearance could disguise. Conversations that once flowed freely became guarded, weighed down by what could not be said aloud. Family members who had endured scrutiny together now disagreed on how much more they could absorb. For some, every unanswered headline felt like surrender. For others, every reckless response felt like self-destruction. The divide was not ideological, it was emotional. It was about endurance versus urgency. The prolonged silence took a personal toll. Each new wave of coverage reopened wounds that had never fully healed. Restraint demanded composure in public and resilience in private, a balance that became harder to maintain with every passing month. Frustration festered. Doubt crept into relationships once defined by loyalty. The question was no longer whether the truth would emerge, but whether the family would survive intact when it did. Accusations, though rarely spoken directly, hung heavy in the air. Was silence a form of complicity? Or was it the only responsible path forward? Those who favoured caution were seen by others as enabling harm. Those who pushed for confrontation were viewed as reckless, willing to gamble the institution's future on emotional release. Each side believed it was protecting the monarchy. Each believed the other was endangering it. Media pressure intensified the strain. Every headline became a point of contention, every omission a potential betrayal. Personal relationships bent under the weight of constant scrutiny, with trust replaced by suspicion. Even moments of privacy felt compromised, as if the narrative had seeped into the walls themselves. The fear was no longer abstract. Permanent reputational damage loomed, not just for the institution, but for individuals whose names would forever be linked to how this crisis was handled. The breaking point arrived quietly, not through a single argument, but through exhaustion. Consensus, once fragile, finally collapsed under the strain of opposing convictions. The family could no longer pretend unity where it no longer existed. Silence was no longer neutral. Action, once postponed, became inevitable. The realization was devastating and clarifying all at once. Doing nothing was now the most dangerous option of all. That moment reshaped everything. The internal fracture forced a choice between continued restraint and decisive action. Neutrality vanished. Positions hardened. What had once been a strategic debate became a matter of survival. The family understood that whatever came next would define not just the outcome of this crisis, but the legacy of how power was exercised under pressure. That collapse set the stage for a decision that would permanently alter the palace's relationship with the press. This was not a leak, it was a release. Deliberate, controlled, unapologetic. The palace chose the moment, the format, and the message. And by doing so, it signaled something unprecedented. Restraint was over. The evidence didn't ask questions. It answered them. And once it went public, there was no rewriting what had already been revealed. The timing was everything. The palace waited until the narrative had reached saturation, until speculation had hardened into assumption and silence had become its own accusation. By choosing this exact moment, officials ensured the evidence would not feel reactive, but inevitable. It arrived when denial would sound hollow and reinterpretation would feel desperate. The release did not interrupt the story, it seized it. And in doing so, it shifted the balance of power in a way few had anticipated. The framing was ruthless in its simplicity. No commentary, no editorializing, just materials presented in sequence, allowing timelines to speak for themselves. Context was embedded in chronology, not opinion. The palace understood that persuasion was unnecessary when clarity was sufficient. By stripping the release of emotion, it amplified impact. This was not about winning sympathy, it was about ending ambiguity. The immediate media reaction was chaos disguised as composure. Outlets scrambled to reassess positions taken years earlier, rewriting language on the fly while insisting nothing had changed. Analysts rushed to panels with incomplete information, filling gaps with speculation that only underscored how unprepared they were for a move of this magnitude. The story they once controlled was now controlling them. Behind the scenes, panic was unmistakable. Calls were placed, statements drafted and discarded. Legal teams convened urgently, passing implications that extended far beyond reputational damage. The evidence carried weight not because it accused, but because it connected. That distinction mattered. Connection invites consequence, and consequence demands response. Legal implications loomed immediately. Exposure without allegation narrowed defenses. Parties implicated indirectly now faced questions they could not easily deflect. Silence became risky. Response became unavoidable. The palace had not accused anyone explicitly, but it had changed the environment in which accountability would be demanded. That shift was intentional. Debate was not the goal. Resolution was. What made the release so aggressive was its finality. There was no suggestion of follow-up, no promise of further clarification. The palace did not invite conversation. It closed one. The message was unmistakable. The period of tolerance had ended. The institution was no longer willing to absorb narratives it believed were manufactured without consequence. This wasn't meant to be debated because debate would imply equivalence between assertion and evidence. The palace rejected that premise entirely. By choosing exposure over engagement, it forced all parties to respond on its terms or not at all. That choice carried risk, but it also carried authority. Once exercised, authority reshapes the field. The calm that followed was deceptive. Surface reactions masked deeper tremors as the implications spread outward, touching relationships, contracts, and alliances that had long relied on discretion. What had been unspoken was now undeniable, and denial, once a refuge, became untenable. But the fallout was only beginning because exposure always creates retaliation. In moments like this, silence becomes a message. No denial, no clarification, no immediate response. For some, that quiet confirmed everything. For others, it suggested a counter-move still forming. The absence of reaction became the loudest sound in the room, forcing everyone to ask the same question: what comes next? The silence landed differently depending on where you stood. To critics, it felt like concession, a pause heavy with implication. In scandals shaped by perception, delay often reads as admission. Each minute without a statement allowed interpretations to harden, filling the vacuum with certainty that had not yet been spoken aloud. But to those who understood the stakes, the quiet carried a different meaning. It felt strategic, calculated. The kind of stillness that precedes movement rather than surrender. An immediate response would have been dangerous. Any rushed denial could lock positions prematurely, narrowing legal options and escalating exposure. In moments like this, words are not just reactions, they are commitments. Silence preserved flexibility. It kept doors open that statements would have slammed shut. Observers began to speculate that legal positioning was underway, that advisors were measuring consequences not just for the present moment, but for every chapter that might follow. Silence in that context became a form of control. Media outlets scrambled to fill the void. Analysts debated tone rather than substance. Panels speculated endlessly, dissecting the lack of response as if it were content itself. The story evolved in real time, shaped as much by absence as by evidence. Every hour without comment amplified tension, drawing more attention to what had not been said. The narrative no longer waited for confirmation, it began writing its own conclusions. Supporters moved quickly to reframe the moment. Silence was described as dignity, as refusal to engage in spectacle, as proof of composure under fire. Statements from allies emphasized patience and resolve, urging audiences to resist judgment until the full picture emerged. This reframing clashed violently with the prevailing mood, creating parallel narratives that could not coexist comfortably. One side saw guilt, the other saw restraint. Both fed the suspense. The unanswered accusation became a living presence, hovering over every discussion. It could not be ignored, yet it could not be resolved. That tension kept the story alive, stretching uncertainty into a kind of psychological pressure. The longer the silence lasted, the more powerful it became. It forced everyone's supporters, critics, institutions to reveal their assumptions before facts could intervene. What made the moment eerie was its stillness. No escalation, no immediate retaliation, just waiting. That waiting suggested confidence or preparation, and either possibility carried consequence. If a response was coming, it would not be casual. If it never came, the silence itself would stand as a final statement, interpreted endlessly without correction. The monarchy watched carefully, understanding that this phase mattered as much as any release. Silence allowed the impact to settle, the implications to spread, and the cost to reveal itself organically. It also delayed closure, extending the life of the story beyond a single news cycle and into something far more destabilizing. And looming over it all is a future the monarchy may never fully control again. This wasn't just about one individual or one deal. It was about power who shapes truth, who profits from access, and who ultimately controls the narrative of modern monarchy. By releasing this evidence, the palace crossed a line it can never uncross. And the consequences will ripple far beyond today's headlines. The long-term impact on palace, media relations is already taking shape. A relationship once governed by mutual restraint has shifted into something colder and more conditional. Access will be questioned. Motives scrutinized. Silence, once interpreted as dignity, will now be read as strategy. Every interaction carries residue from this moment, a reminder that the old rules no longer apply cleanly. Trust, once extended by default, must now be earned under a harsher light. That erosion spreads beyond a single institution. Confidence in how stories are sourced, framed, and amplified has taken a visible hit. When influence operates quietly, credibility suffers loudly once exposed. Audiences begin to ask different questions, not just about what is reported, but why it appears when it does, and who benefits from its timing. Institutions built on authority feel the tremor as certainty gives way to skepticism. What emerges is a new era of confrontation over silence itself. The palace has signaled that restraint is not infinite, that withholding response is a choice, not an obligation. That recalibration redraws defensive limits. The monarchy is no longer content to absorb narratives it believes are manufactured beyond accountability. Exposure becomes an option. Documentation becomes leverage, and that shift forces every stakeholder to reassess risk. Media credibility now sits under renewed scrutiny. Patterns once overlooked will be revisited. Exclusives weighed against independence. Relationships mapped where none were acknowledged before. This does not mean the end of influence, but it does mean influence must operate with greater caution. The audience has been taught to look for structure behind spontaneity, and that lesson cannot be unlearned. The story refuses to end cleanly because its implications are systemic. It touches contracts, ethics, and the invisible lines that separate reporting from persuasion. It lingers in unanswered questions and unresolved responses. Even silence continues to speak, shaping expectation and fueling speculation. The future will be defined not by a single statement, but by how often institutions choose exposure over endurance and how prepared they are for the consequences. What is certain is that a threshold has been crossed. The palace has accepted the cost of speaking after years of waiting, and in doing so it has altered the terrain. Power has been asserted not through proclamation, but through proof. The aftermath will not be immediate. It will unfold in stages, reshaping alliances and recalibrating caution across the landscape. Because once the palace breaks its silence, the story doesn't end, it multiplies, and the world is about to see where it leads. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.